Hi everyone, it's me Spring, the fiber enthusiast, and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be making that cowl that you saw in the picture, the thumbnail, and we're going to do it on the Addi, and it's real easy to do, quick workup. You can add fringe to it, you could add tassels or buttons or whatever you wish. You can make it bigger, smaller, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. It all depends on the length. The basic width of the cowl is not going to change because we're working it as a tube instead of flat. Now, if you wanted to work it flat back and forth, you could do that as well, but we're going to do this as just a tube. So from here to here is not going to change. That's the back of the neck, and again, that's with a rolled down collar, but it's all the same width this way. But as far as the part that goes around the tube length, you can do it as long as you'd like. I'm going to give you what I did for that particular one and the one that we're making together. For today's tutorial, I will be using some of my own hand spun and hand spun yarn. This fiber came from Companion Fiber here in West Virginia. It is handcrafted. This colorway is called Hickory. It is 100% merino. It was a 4-ounce roving braid, and then I ended up spinning it probably through two or three of my live spin and chats. Now, the one that you've seen in the thumbnail is hand blended fibers by me and hand spun by me. So we are going from fiber to hand spun to making a project. All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do is locate your number one needle by turning your crank on your Addi, and I've come up here to my number one needle. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do what's called a long tail cast on for the Addi. I'm just going to hook that. See, I've got it nice and hooked here. I'm going to hook that very first number one needle, which is the very first black needle. Then I'm going to crank my handle until that needle drops. Now I know that it's secured for the most part, and I'm going to go behind my next needle and in front of the following. And that is the repeat all the way around for the cast on. Behind one, in front of one, behind one, in front of one. And you're going to continue to work that all the way around. And you will know that you've done it right if your last needle is yarn behind needle. So you're going to wrap around that needle and go into your slot, your yarn guide, and close your yarn guide. Now I'm going to work around one time before I set my counter. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that everything is moving nice and smoothly, and I know that I'm not going to have to redo it. So I don't count round one until after my official cast on. This is just completing that cast on. Okay, I'm all the way back around to the beginning here. Now I'm going to go ahead and set my round counter here or row, whichever you wish. We're going in the round, so it's a round counter. Now we're gonna go, that is 160 rounds. Once you have 160 rounds, I will meet back up with you. I know that sounds like a lot, but trust me, it's well worth it. If you would like to cast on, you know, to begin with and run some very, very high contrasting color for 5 to 7 rounds and end it the same way, you are completely not obligated to do it the way that I'm showing you. This is merely a suggestion and how I made mine. So you can use scrap yarn if you wish. I am not at this point. At the end, I will. So I'm going to go ahead and just work on 220 rounds. And when I've come up to the end, I will show you what to do next. Okay, so now I have exactly 160 rounds. I'm going to open my keeper. I'm going to pull up my yarn and pick up what I have left of my cake. I'm going to set it right in the center. So here I am hooked on that very first needle there. And I'm just going to grab some waste yarn, and I want to run just a couple rounds of waste yarn in here. Now I'm going to back this up just a hair so that way I can catch that first needle with this waste yarn. And there we are. So I'm just going to hang on to that waste yarn just for a stitch or two. Like that. Make sure everything's nice and neat and nothing's going to get hung up. And I'm going to go around about 5 to 7 rounds with this waste yarn, just so I can have live stitches to work with. And it's extremely high contrasting color. So I'll be back once I have the 5 to 10 rounds, something like that, and we will take it off of the Addi. Okay, so I did another 7 rounds just with the waste yarn. I'm gonna go ahead and cut away from my waste yarn ball. I'm gonna pull this over, lay it down on the inside, and then all I'm gonna do is just crank around to release this fabric from the Addi. We want those live stitches. I don't want to pick up those live stitches off of each needle for this particular project. So we're just gonna crank around, and it takes 2 times around for it to release from the Addi. And now we're completely free from the Addi. So I'm going to readjust the camera and get you situated over the workspace, and we will finish putting this together. Okay, some of the things that you will need is, of course, a pair of scissors, a needle, some stitch markers, and a crochet hook. The crochet hook that you use doesn't have to be real big. This is an F hook, which is a 3.75 millimeter. I used it on the original, and I'll show you the difference in yarn size here. One is closer to a worsted weight. Let's get to a consistent spot here. One is closer to a worsted weight. This one is closer to a light worsted weight. And for the most part, the hickory one that I just did on the Addi runs a light worsted to a DK, mostly a DK. Again, this is hand spun yarn by myself, so it can vary a little bit. I try real hard, but some of it is a little thicker and some of it is a little thinner. But that's okay, because for a project like this, it works out great. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move that up out of the way a little bit. And luckily, I have enough left over to do some fringe. I will be mixing it with probably some black. And now I'm just going to unroll my little tube here. Move this stuff out of the way. And what I do is I find the beginning and end where the waste yarn is. So I'm going to find that and I'm going to grab hold of it. Then I'm going to go to the other end where the beginning and end of the round is, and I'm going to grab it. And what I'm going to do is attempt to make this as flat as possible and even, because if this was over here, it would be twisted along the way and it wouldn't lay right. So you want to make sure that you're getting it as close as possible to even. Now I'm going to pull that string just a little bit, just to kind of tighten these stitches up here. All right. So here I have that end, and I'm just going to work my way down to the other end, stretching it out a little bit. We're going to have to fix all of our stitches and make sure that they're all uniform by pulling on this fabric this way and this way. It stretches them out, gets them all straight and even. So I'm just working my way to the other end. And for right now, I will be leaving that waste yarn on because I will be working into those stitches and I don't want to lose those stitches. All right, so here we are. Make sure everything looks nice and uniform. There we go. All right, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to get it about center of your workspace in front of you, and you're going to flip the one end towards you from right to left. And now we're going to crisscross. We're going to bring the left side over to meet the right side. So here we are. We're going to go straight over the top like this and line it up with the side of the fabric. And then we can adjust and make sure that everything is nice and neat. And if you've worked cowls with me before in crochet or knit, you know that this is my absolute favorite way to make a cowl. I love the down the center here. It gives you the opportunity to roll a collar on it. Stick your phone in the little pocket if you wish. It also gives you a better coverage of your chest. This goes under the lapel of your jacket better. I really like this style best. Now, if you're not a fan of this style, that's okay. You can also do an infinity scarf. So what you would do is give it a little twist in the fabric. So take one end and flip it over. Okay. And then bring these two ends together and sew them together. Then you have an infinity scarf. And it would hang on your neck like this. That is perfectly okay. This is your project. I'm just showing you what I did to make mine, and I'm going to show you how it looks with or without the twisted fringe. I also have a tutorial on showing how to do twisted fringe by hand, as well as using what I use, the fringe twister, little doohickey that twists my fringe for me. Yeah, I like twisted fringe. It looks better after it's been washed. It doesn't get really rough looking like a lot of fringe will do. It'll fray. So yeah. All right, let's go ahead and get busy. I've gabbed long enough. Let's get busy on crocheting this in together. So here I'm attached to the ball of yarn. Now, you can do this one of two ways. This is entirely up to you. Once again, you can pick up stitches with your crochet hook. I'm going to zoom in so that way you can see. Okay, so you can pick up stitches, and let's go ahead and pick up this stitch here and pull through. All right, so I have a loop on my hook here, and what I'm gonna do, let me get in camera, is I'm gonna go to the next stitch and pick it up and reach over to the next stitch on the opposite side and pick it up. And I'm going to pull it through. And through. Then you'd go to the next stitch and the next stitch. Pull it through and through. And you just continue working on. This is one way of doing it. Another way is you can remove your waste yarn and then crochet them together. You can sew it up with a whip stitch. Just make sure that you catch these live stitches or you will have stitches running off from you. So all I'm doing is working down both sides, picking up a stitch on each side. And pulling it through and through. Going to my very next stitch, picking it up, going across to the other side, picking that stitch up, pull it through and through. So I'm going to continue working down this edge here, and then I'll come back and show you how to remove that waste yarn. Okay, so for the time being, I've now come to the end. I'm going to remove my hook and place a stitch marker into that stitch there, just to hold it and keep it from unraveling. So now we're going to remove this, and I'm going to go back here to the beginning. There we are. Just going to go ahead and pull this off. If it doesn't come off this easy, you will need to actually cut it off, and it is super, super easy to do so. You just need to make sure and cut only your waste yarn. All right, so now I see right here, I got a stray stitch. I'm gonna catch it with a stitch marker. Let me zoom back out so you can see a little better. Okay, so here I see that I got a stray stitch. I'm going to go ahead and catch it and just double check to make sure that I don't have any other stray dropped stitches before I move on. I think that's the only one. Okay, so that's that one. And I'll just catch it when I sew in or crochet in these two ends together like this. I will just make sure that I catch that loop. It's ideal not to have that, but things happen. Okay, so that one is good. Now I just need to move on and do the same thing to this. It's a little bit more difficult because your starting strand here, which is your cast on edge, if you did waste yarn beforehand, it would be easier to locate those stitches for you. But you're going to do exactly the same thing if you did not use waste yarn. You're going to find the end stitch. Separate these out to make sure that I catch the right stitches here. Okay, so here is my last stitch. I'm just going to insert my hook into that stitch, if I can get a hold of it. And now I'm going to reach over and grab the first stitch on the opposite side. There we are. And now for this, I'm just going to yarn over with my tail and pull it through, and that's now going to be my start to working the slip stitches down the side. So I'm just going to work across, finding the next stitch, and go across to the other side and find the next stitch. Pull through and through. Again, next stitch and next stitch. Pull through and through. And you're just going to continue doing that all the way till you have reached the other end. When you've reached the other end, you're going to put a stitch marker in that final loop, because that's the loop that we're going to pick up when we start seaming them together. And I'm going to go ahead and get off camera to finish this up so I can actually see what I'm doing. And just continue working down this edge. I'll meet back up with you in a moment. Okay, so now you should have both ends of the tube completely closed off and ready to finish this up. What I have here is my ball of yarn, and I'm going to turn this so that way you can see. I have a loose stitch here, so I'm going to, very first thing, stick my hook into that stitch and pull my yarn through. Now, with that being said, you want to make sure that your ends, your corners here, your edges, all the edges are meeting up nice and neat. And we are just simply going to slip stitch down the side. So I have this one here. I'm going to reach over and go into the next available to me stitch. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see better. Okay, so here I am in the next available stitch, holding my pieces together. I'm just going to go straight into the bottom fabric. Let's see if I can get this where you can see it. Straight into the bottom fabric. I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop all the way through both sets of fabric, and then I'm going to pull it through. I'm going to go into the very next stitch here and locate the very next stitch on the back, yarn over and pull a loop through, and then through the loop that was on your hook. Next, and you're just going to continue to work down this side all the way to the point here, to this point here where the two corners come together. And as you notice, I have 2 stitch markers. I'm going to eliminate one of them by doing this. I'm going to hang on to that stitch. I don't want it to disappear on me. And I'm just going to put them together. That way I know that I'm going to be picking those 2 stitches up together. All right. So I'm just going to continue to work down this side all the way to the end, going into the next stitch and picking up the next stitch. Then yarn over, pull through both of those layers and through the loop on your hook. Again. Now, once I have reached the very corner of this, the point, I will meet back up with you and we will go around that corner together. Okay, so I'm coming up to the last stitch here before my corner. Those 2 stitches we're going to pick up off of the stitch marker. Just catching those last couple stitches here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pick up these 2 stitches from the stitch marker. This is my corner. So I'm going to go through those 2 stitches and go through and through. Now I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to pick up the very next stitch. And locate the very next stitch on the back of the work and yarn over and continue slip stitching my way around. So now we're on the last side and we're going to work all the way up this side to where the bottom layer meets up with the top layer and ends. So we're going to work all the way to that point and then we'll cut away from our yarn and start our fringe process. So I'm just going to continue working up just like I was doing before. Front stitch and back stitch and slip stitch. So go ahead and continue working up the side of your cowl and I will meet back up with you and we'll get this fringe started. Okay, so I've come up to the very end. I'm going to go ahead and chain 2 and I'll show you why in just a moment. I'm going to cut away from my yarn ball. You don't need a really long tail, just enough to weave in. And pull that tail through that last chain and pinch where your chains are and push them down towards your work and pull on your tail. And that kind of gives it a good little knot there. Now you're just going to simply weave in your ends, which this should be the only end that you're having to weave in at this point. And I'm just going to come down and get into this fabric, the stitches themselves, and catch a few of the stitches. Oops, lost it. All right, let's try that again. I'm going to come down into the fabric. I'm grabbing the fabric. It's 2 layers. So I'm kind of going in between the layers at this point, grabbing a few stitches, and I'm going to come out the other end down here. Now I'm just going to sneak my needle back in there, in between those 2 layers, and work my way back up. And on this last trip through, I'm going to actually split the yarn and get my needle to pull that tail through the plies of yarn. That will help it stick together much better. Pull that through there Give it a little tug and snip off the excess. And now just give it a little stretch and it's in the fabric now. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, I'm going to zoom back out. We're going to talk about the fringe. So fringe is up to you, and you can continue to slip stitch all the way around to clean this up if you want. But because I'm going to be putting fringe in this area, this section here, we just slip stitch together. It's not going to be that different. And I'll show you, it's not going to be a dramatic change from where you slip stitch back here to the fabric. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. We'll move over the other one, and I've got my fringe all cut for it, and I've started making the twisted fringe. So here we have the twisted fringe already started. Get it straightened out so that way it looks presentable. So there's the twisted fringe, and as you can see, if you start it one stitch above where the join ends or begins, then it takes away from that change in the fabric from being bulky from your slip stitch. All right, so here's your standard fringe right here. This is standard fringe. And what I'm doing for my twisted fringe, of course, I'm using my fringe twister, and I will insert a card or at the end of this video the link to how to use the fringe twister or do it by hand. Now this is optional. All of this is optional. You can do this if you want. But basically what we're doing is we're hyper twisting each of the strands. And you can do that 2, 3 of them, 4 of them. It's up to you. And then once you get them all hyper twisted individually, you're going to bring them together and just place a knot at the bottom. I'm not going to put a knot in that because it's not twisted yet. And once you release it, you now have how many ever strands you now have twisted together, how many ever you decided to do. And what that does is it keeps your fringe from separating, and it allows it to stay nice through multiple wash and dry. You can also, if you do fringe like this, you can gently hand wash it and lay flat to dry, and that will help preserve the twist in it. Another thing that you could do is put a knot at the end of each individual strand, just a little knot at the end, and that will also assist keeping it from unraveling and fraying really bad. So that's just a couple of options. I've seen where people, put buttons and all kinds of stuff on this style cowl, and that's completely up to you. You do not have to do it this way. This is just mere suggestion and how I've made mine and how I'm going to continue to finish making mine. Now, I already have all the strands cut for this one, so I'm going to set it aside. I'm going to pull this one back over, and in that video that I'm going to link, I show you how to attach your fringe strands before you go to twisting them. So I'm going to do these two, and what I'll do is match them up and pull out a certain amount. For this particular case, I am doing, let's see, 12 inches, I think. I've got a measuring tape here on the side of my table. It helps a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and do 12 inches. And then you'll need your crochet hook again. And you'll split your 12 inches in half here. Insert your hook into the very first stitch above the last part of the join. So where it goes in and it is at the very top of that join, that's where we're going to start. We're going to pick up right there. Now I'm going to put that loop onto my hook, pull my loop through, and then I'm going to yarn over all 4 of them strands and pull them through that loop that was on my hook, and then just cinch it down. And if you want there's 2 ways of doing this. You have that loop that was on your hook. Let's see if I can get you a good view of it. So we have the loop on our hook that goes over our strands. And then if we flip it over and look at the back side, it looks like the same, but depending on the yarn and the color yarn you use, you're going to notice a very strong V right here. So that would be the back of the fringe that you just placed on. To make sure that it's on the back side, you always want to bring your hook in from the back side of your work through your stitch to the front to pull your strands through. Okay, so there you have it. There are 2 cowls made, very similar in size yarn, very close in size yarn. Both of these are hand spun by me. And yeah, this one was blended fibers by me and then hand spun. And actually both of these yarns I did spin during live video spin and chat. This one was dyed by someone else, companion fiber, and these fibers were also dyed by someone else. So there you have the cowls. This one has the fringe on it. This is just the start of the fringe. And again, at the end of this video, I will link that link to send you over to where I show you how to use the fringe twister if you have not seen that yet. And I also demonstrate how to twist it by hand. All right, everyone, thank you for your patience and watching this thoroughly. And I hope that you enjoy it, and I would love to see it if you make one and see your version of this cowl. Be blessed, be a blessing, and until next time, bye for now.